To talk to the locals both on the picket lines and the leadership of both the 543 and 82 with respect to the outpouring of support that we received on their behalf just last week. We needed to share this information with the locals in order to give them a sense of the kind of support that they're getting from across Ontario. We had tremendous support on the floor of a convention that actually the delegates, we had to hold them back. They wanted to adjourn the convention and get on the buses and come down to Windsor. We only opened the conference up at the convention on the Wednesday night, and on the Thursday morning we had this motion on the floor ready to close down the convention to come down to Windsor. They wanted to be on the picket lines with the membership here. So we obviously talked them out of that because we wanted to be able to do the business of our union, but they then proceeded to raise over $250,000 on the floor from different locals across the province. This was the most amount of money ever raised at a CUPE event for a striking local, or locals for this matter in this case. So we're here today to basically you know, to say to the locals and here in Windsor that you've got the total and absolute support of the CUPE national organisation, CUPE Ontario, and all of the locals across the province. I've never seen so much unanimity on an issue as I did around the Windsor strike. People are feeling this in a very personal way across the province, and we need our own members here in Windsor to recognise that there is tremendous support out there, and that the membership want to mobilise. You know, in the very near future, they decided that they want to do something in addition to raising the money. The one message I want to leave from my little presentation before I pass you over to Paul, and that is basically to say that if Eddie Francis thinks that he is going to starve the CUPE membership in this city into submission, he better think twice. Our union is and has in the past being prepared to take and withstand long strikes. Vancouver went on for 4 months. We had a strike in Quebec went on for 15 months. The intestinal fortitude of this union should not be tested by this mayor. We will not allow our members to be starved into submission. There's an issue on the table here, a couple of issues on the table that Paul wants to talk about in terms of what we deem to be a fair solution to getting this strike settled. The last point I want to make is to say to the mayor, to say to the city councillors, would you please allow the bargaining committees to get together and resolve this strike. There's just way too much politics in Windsor, way too many councillors freelancing, way too many statements being made by the mayor, shutting down options when we're trying to propose means and ways of moving forward. There's way too much politics in the media in terms of, you know, polarizing the community, trying to pit one group of workers against another group of workers, citizens against citizens. Really and truly, I would ask everybody to chill out in Windsor and allow the bargaining committees from both sides to get to a bargaining table. I thought we had a media blackout. I thought the mayor had agreed the last time I was in the city that there would be a media blackout. This morning I hear him, you know, yakking all over the radio all about the internal mechanisms and the possible proposals that might be coming forward, preempting any solutions, councillors holding their own meetings. It really and truly is getting ridiculous, and it's not conducive to collective bargaining. There's never been a set of bargaining that I'm aware of, and Paul, I'm sure, will back this up with his experience. We've never seen anything like this in our lives. We really and truly ought to just get back to a bargaining table, empower the bargaining committee from the employer side. Our bargaining committee is already empowered. Let's get an agreement. So with that, I'll just pass you over to Paul, who's got some suggestions.
Thank you, Sid, and good morning. It's my great privilege to be here in Windsor for the second time in the last number of weeks in the course of this dispute. To speak to our members, as Sid has mentioned, there was an outpouring of support for them while we were in convention in Toronto last week. We're here to speak to the members directly about that. And B, to speak to the citizens of Windsor to affirm a couple of things. Number one, CUPE's in the business of negotiating collective agreements. We have 3,200 collective agreements across Canada, 600,000 members, just under 600,000 members. Last year, for example, in 2008, we nailed down 810 collective agreements. We had 6 disputes across Canada. Today, as we speak, there are hundreds of collective agreements that are open here in Ontario and across Canada. We have 3 locals on strike, 2 in Windsor and 1 in British Columbia. My point is that 99.3% of the time, our over 3,000 collective agreements are concluded peacefully in the collective bargaining process, without a lockout, without a strike. So what's going on in Windsor here is the exception, not the norm. We're into week 7 of it. We think the community has become very divided over some of the issues in dispute, but the community is united on one point. They want the Mayor of Windsor and the Council and CUPE to fix this situation for Windsor civic workers to get back to work. We think that's the predominant view in the community. No matter where people stand on the issues, they would like to see this dispute ended. And 7 weeks into the dispute, we too want to see it resolved. The parties aren't talking at this juncture. Our last pass with one another, the city left the bargaining table. They haven't returned. Our bargaining team is willing and able and prepared to return to bargaining at any time, but that's not happening, and the dispute is dragging on. We think at this juncture, the assistance of a third party is required to bring these parties together and assist them in coming to a collective agreement. We don't think there's any panacea with arbitration as a method of settling disputes, but 7 weeks into this dispute, we think the citizens want it over, and our suggestion is that similar situations across Canada, that's what the parties have done. Our members would prefer to be at work. If there's an inconvenience to the public, there's a demonstrable inconvenience to 1,800 workers who haven't had a paycheck for 7 weeks, feel very strongly about the issues in dispute, and would like to end those disputes. Other parties have done that. The City of Ottawa did it this past winter after a 55-day transit strike. The parties agreed to enter into mediated, arbitrated discussions, and that's how they settled their dispute. They're now contemplating that as a method of, it's another union, not CUPE, settling all future disputes. We in CUPE have done that, not as our first choice, but as a matter of settling a dispute. And I read with interest in the local media comments from members of council saying we don't need people from outside the boundaries of Windsor to impose some settlement on these parties. Well, there are very, very competent and qualified people within the boundaries of Windsor. I look at a former premier, Howard Pauley, a professor at the university, Ted Serlinka, a well-respected, not management, not union, labor relations practitioner. And I see last night at council, the Windsor Concerned Citizens Action Committee, some leading citizens, apparently in the space of a couple of days, thousands of citizens signing their petition, asking the parties to get back together and suggesting a third-party arbitration process as one option to end this dispute. So we're here in Windsor to meet with our members. We're also here to affirm for the citizens of Windsor our desire to end this dispute in an honorable way for both parties in a manner that's been tried in other communities and worked. It's been done in this community between Windsor City Council and other unions. So not our first choice, but a viable option to end what could be, as Sid says, a very, very long dispute. We're now open for any and all questions that you have for Sid, myself, or our 2 presidents.
Mr. Morse, in my experience, when a public service goes on strike or is involved in a labor dispute, whether it's lockout or strike, the first thing they do, they try to build public support for their cause. Now, I think it's safe to say that this strike is a public relation disaster, pure and simple. I mean, there is no public support out there. There's not a lot of public support out there for this strike. What are your thoughts on that?
I think any public sector strike poses an inconvenience for A, the members that are striking who go without a paycheck, and B, for the citizens who enjoy the services that our members provide. It's not a popular thing in any way, shape, or form. It's much different than private sector disputes, which are between a particular union and a particular employer, number one. Number two, I believe what I said from talking to the members and from our local leadership and from Sid, who's been in the community, that the citizens of Windsor are divided over some of the issues in dispute. I'm not sure that they're particularly happy with CUPE and or the mayor and council. People want this dispute over. There's a range of opinions on the issues in dispute. Number three, going forward, Sid Ryan is absolutely correct. This has the potential to be a very long dispute. One option we're putting on the table today is to end the dispute, put people back to work, and have the assistance of a third party to resolve these issues. Windsor City Council themselves have gone down this road in the past with their nurses union. The City of Ottawa just went down this path. We've encountered this across Canada. Not our first option as a trade union, but 7 weeks into a dispute, our members are looking for a solution here, and I think the citizens of Windsor expect CUPE and Council to pursue any and all avenues to resolve the thing. So I could dwell on what's happened each and every day for the past 7 weeks. That won't resolve this issue this morning. Moving forward, we want to return to our jobs providing services to the citizens of Windsor, number one. Number two, we're proposing what some leading citizens are proposing, an option to assist Windsor City Council and CUPE to end this impasse.
Paul, City Council reaffirmed its position last night by a vote of 8-3 this time. It wasn't unanimous. What's your reaction, first of all, and do you see some of the councillors maybe coming your way on the arbitration issue?
I think I'll give a response, and I'll pass the mic to Sid. He was actually at council last night. But from my vantage point, I think the councillors of the City of Windsor have had a lot of discussion about this. There's a lot of discussion through the media. We believe the negotiating committee for the citizens of Windsor have had their hands tied by a council that's wrestling with itself over these issues. And there's been comments made in the paper about, you know, arbitration being some panacea where 80% of the union's proposals would be acted on positively by an arbitrator. Boy, that's not my experience across Canada, or we would see a lot more arbitration. I think the parties often, issues get sawn off, and at times maybe neither party is completely happy. But our message for the citizens of Windsor today, whom the councillors are elected to represent, is that we believe there's unanimity in the community that they want Windsor City Council and CUPE to settle this dispute, and they're frustrated with both parties. And I know that we're very sensitive to that point, and I expect members of Windsor City Council are as well.
If I could just on the first off, I know the paper this morning quoted 8-3. We have it on fairly good authority that the vote was actually 6-4, which implies to us, even if it was 8-3, City Council, you're beginning to see some cracks in City Council. They're now beginning to take a look at the option, for example, of arbitration. We know that was one of the issues that came up last night, and they had long discussions on it. Clearly, the mayor is quite concerned that the public would buy into the notion of an arbitrated settlement because they want their services back, and of course the employees don't want to be out on strike. It's the perfect solution in many respects. It is not our preferred option, and as Paul has indicated, arbitrations have gone against unions many times. It is not, as the newspapers are trying to spin out, that this is a given that always the unions will end up with gaining more from the arbitration process. For example, we would not be putting any items to an arbitrator other than those that you disagree with. Right now, I guess it's wages and the benefits for retirees. Outside of those two items, there's been a lot of agreement. And by the way, what people are not focusing in on, both of these unions have spent a lot of time finding cost savings for the City of Windsor. Like, people seem to forget about all that happened earlier on in the negotiations, where CUPE stepped up to the plate and found many savings in many different areas around sick leave and everything else. And of course, that would form part of a collective agreement. But we don't hear any talk about what CUPE actually has already given up at the bargaining table. But what we've been faced with is the mayor coming in from day one, basically saying you'll pay for every increase or any increase that you get, and we want the benefit package off of you. And that has not changed from day one. We've been now like 7 weeks, and for 2 or 3 months prior to that, attempting to get this mayor to move off that position. And collective bargaining is about give and take. And when one side keeps giving and giving and giving, as we did and found savings, and we hear nothing coming back from the other side except that the city needs this money, we cannot afford to be paying these kinds of legacy costs. And yet last night at council, there were at least 3 items that came forward at council last night. One was the multi-resident taxes. Let's lower them by $1 million a year. And then there was a second proposal for a $2 million reduction, and then there was somebody else coming forward looking for donations and grants from council. All of them basically passed at council. Had we put that $1 million that we were prepared to reduce taxes by for multi-residents, the apartment building owners, for example, into a pool of money, a pot of money, they could have paid for retiree benefits for the next 30 years. Or had they been allowed to put it in to build up over the next 30 years, there'd be more than enough money there. So in other words, the story that we're getting from council around the question of not being able to afford these costs are just not striking home at all with us in many ways. When you see when you know for a fact that there won't be a penny's worth of savings to this city for the next 30 years, and yet we're out on strike for the past 7 weeks for that. I don't understand it. Arbitration seems to be the only way to move the mayor off the position that he's in right now.
Sid and Paul, your thoughts on the fact that the national president, CAW, apologized to the mayor on behalf of the labor movement for actions of CUPE members?
You know,
in Windsor.
Look, we could go back and talk about all of the incidents that have happened, and I don't know where that's going to get us. There's been incidents that have happened on both sides. We've had members who had an ankle broken. We've had members who got punched in the head. We get members who get abused every day of the week on the picket line. We could come in here today and talk about all of that, and we can talk about what happened and Ken Loenza apologising. The fact of the matter is, it's really not going to get us anywhere. There are incidents that happened. We wish that they hadn't have happened, obviously, but we're now looking forward. We're saying, look, from this day forward, let's get to a bargaining table. And if we can't get to a bargaining table to resolve these disputes, how about we move forward into arbitration? But let's get people back to work. And the more the media and everybody else tries to focus on these kinds of events and whipping up the public and stirring people up and pitting public against public and member against member, that's not going to help the city at all. So I'd rather, you know, from this point forward, look into the future and say, okay, where are we going to go from here? You know.
But I'm not asking about the incident. I'm asking about the fact that most unions rely on other unions for support. I'm just asking your thoughts on the president of another union apologizing on behalf of
and it's the same premise. How do you put the wedge in between two unions? Let me just tell you. See that piece of paper? You could not put that piece of paper in between the CAW leadership and the CUPE leadership. We are absolutely solid together. And Ken Loenza went in to do his best to help the situation in this city because he's from this community. Whatever Ken needed to say, we fully support Ken 100%.
Paul, I'm wondering about comments during the York University strike. You were opposed to arbitration, but this time you're in favor of arbitration. What's the difference here?
Well, first of all, CUPE's local unions across Canada are autonomous bodies. We work very closely with them. At York University, we had an employer that A, wouldn't come to the bargaining table, and B, before bargaining commenced, were demanding a legislative solution to their round of bargaining. And the issues in dispute there involving how does somebody move from 25 years of part-time teaching to a tenured professor position, we wanted to discuss those with our employer. And that employer wouldn't come to the bargaining table. It's ironic, the issues ended up being resolved between the parties after an arbitrator was appointed. But it was the position of our York University local that they didn't want arbitration to settle it. These two locals didn't and don't really want arbitration to settle it. 7 weeks into this dispute, we're trying to offer up responsible solutions to this dilemma. We believe, and if we're wrong, I guess time will tell, We believe the predominant view in this community is that they want the mayor and CUPE to settle this round of bargaining. The two parties have been unable to do that. The mayor and the city walked away from the bargaining table just over a week and a half ago. There are no talks planned. We think it's a responsible position to put forward an option that Sid Ryan is absolutely correct, is no panacea. But in this circumstance, these two locals have discussed this at length with the leadership. And in order to resolve the dispute, if we're right and the public wants this ended, and they're upset at the mayor, they're upset at CUPE, they're just upset, we think it's a responsible proposal, and it's one that Len Wallace, Victoria Cross, Dr. Howard Pauley, and other leading citizens have put forward as well. Is it perfect? No. Is it responsible? We think it is.
But the perception, I guess, would be that there you're in a position of strength, here you're in a position of weakness, and that's why you're going to an arbitrator. And it wasn't the CUPE locals, it was, in fact, you yourself that called for arbitration, and this time you yourself are also calling for arbitration. So I'm wondering if you can give me kind of the specific difference, because I don't quite understand it.
Yeah, well, the locals at York University did not want arbitration, and myself and Sid and other leaders attended that picket line, as is our responsibility, and we reflected the viewpoint of those locals. And if it's viewed by some in the community as a sign of weakness on the part of CUPE, I'll plead weak if it helps to resolve this situation. These two locals are into week 7 of a strike. As Sid Ryan said, that strike's going to continue until it's resolved. One resolution to the strike that the two locals are comfortable with, and we're comfortable with, is giving this to a third party.
But
that isn't, in my opinion, a sign of weakness. It's a responsible position. But at the end of the day, I guess the public will digest this message we're giving.